After every major tragedy, there's always the question of where to go next. What happens after? While it was never asked out loud, every character in Degrassi had to face it. Like with Claude's death, there were conflicting ideas on how to move on. I'm certain Raditch wasn't alone in not wanting to do Dracula so soon after the shooting. There is a real fear of not being sensitive to those who've died or the circumstances of the death. It's not easy to tell whether it's right to do a play with so much killing, even if it's very fantastical. But I think I personally side with the drama club on this. People need to be allowed to carry on, and there is something to be said for stories where good guys win in the end. It does provide a sense of hope, that though evil is strong, the heroes will prevail, and many students needed that, to hope that there is something to look forward to after the recent tragedy. People like Rick don't have to win, and even fail that, some people just need a distraction, something to focus on rather than the fact that a kid died and another is in the hospital, whether it be laughing at jocks doing ballet or cheering as Van Helsing slays Lucy. Forgetting your troubles doesn't resolve them, but it prevents you from dwelling too much over what cannot change. And hey, if nothing else good came from it, the play finally gave us JT and Liberty getting together. It was quite sudden and not immediately clear why after 4 years of no sparks they clicked, but all becomes crystal when you think about it. Sure, they're friendly and hung around the same people, but up until now, JT never really got to know Liberty. He never saw her creative side. But through working on the play, he got to experience her creativity and the parts of Liberty that aren't always there in other situations, like her sometimes rebellious nature. It also didn't hurt that she was over her cringy phase. With Toby, where to go from here was a lot harder. All around him, he constantly heard people calling his friend a psycho, acting as if he wasn't a person, but a monster, as though he didn't have a grieving family. Even Toby wasn't certain how to think of Rick. Immediately after, he was very much in the psycho camp, but hearing that Rick died caused him to flip back and forth between the two sides. Of course, Toby didn't support what Rick did, yet he often had to be his defender. He was still Toby's friend. He was still the person Toby had that silly bet with. He still suffered daily bullying. Rick shooting Jimmy didn't erase any of that. And unfortunately, it took JT some time to realize this and how Toby was feeling. He didn't choose to be friends with the school shooter, so he didn't deserve the anger or hatred that Rick himself earned. It was heartwarming to see JT attend the memorial for Toby's sake, for the sake of his best friend. I actually think they wouldn't have rekindled their friendship if the shooting didn't happen. There wasn't a reason previously for the two to hang out except for sharing mutual friends. It seemed like they were going apart and needed something to reunite them. The aftermath obviously wasn't positive for all. It's not stated in the show, but I think the shooting triggered Craig's bipolar disorder. Of course, there must have been underlying pre-existing causes like genetics or brain biology, but traumatic events can act as a catalyst to the first bipolar episode in a person. For instance, finding your friend after they've been shot. We don't get to see how Craig personally dealt with the experience, but no doubt it messed him up. And considering his first bipolar episode was so soon after the shooting, it at least is a theory worth considering. Though we also don't see how Alex dealt with her part in the incident, she was clearly messed up by it. She even said as much when she told Jay that she needed to talk about what happened. As I stated in my previous video about Alex and the shooting, I wouldn't be surprised if she's been beating herself up for this ever since. Sure, she can rest easy knowing Jay and Spinner were the ones who caused Jimmy to get shot, but she'd still see herself as having added to the build-up to that point. She still wouldn't have seen herself as someone who caused Rick to bring the gun to school because remember, no one except us would have known that Rick almost shot Paige. This could also be a part of why she doesn't take future planning seriously. Maybe Alex doesn't think she has one. Maybe she thinks that she doesn't deserve better. And because she can't talk about her role in the paint and feathers prank, she can't be helped in dealing with this. Sean also was trying hard not to deal with the shooting. You can see echoes of how Craig acted after his dad died in Sean. Coldly not letting him think about the situation past I did what had to be done, rejecting Ellie when she tried to talk to him about what's going on in his head, fighting the recognition that he might have killed a person. Way worse than deafening someone. There's no way to be like Stone in this situation. You can run from it, but it will never truly go away. Even if you police your conscious thoughts, the memory will still return in dreams. Even though his behavior nearly got him drowned, the aftermath turned into a net positive for Sean. He finally got to deal with his history with Tyler and that he deafened him in one ear. Sean finally apologized to Emma for the previous year, but most importantly, he reestablished a relationship with his parents. Sean got to see that though they don't always show it and can say the wrong things, his mom and dad loved him, enough to send him away to keep him out of jail. They're not the best people, but they care. and they try. They never actually gave up on him. His parents were what he needed the most at the time. And living with them seemed to help, as he seems much better by the time he comes back to Degrassi. When he returns to Toronto, he's not running away from anything. This time, he's running to something. Unfortunately, Sean skipping town left Ellie alone, and alone is something that she really doesn't do well with. We can see this in her trying to get Marco to stay over and basically begging Alex to move in, but through this temporary hardship, Ellie was forced to reconnect with her mom and see the progress that she'd made. Last time we saw Mrs. Nash, she was eternally drunk and refused to take care of her daughter. But here, she was 3 months sober and doing everything she could to prove to Ellie that she changed, even going as far to pay her daughter's rent in full. Mrs. Nash didn't even try to blackmail Ellie into coming home by withholding the money. She let Ellie berate her in public, anything to mend their relationship. It's reasonable for her to trust that her mother hasn't actually changed, but Alex was right that she needed to at least try to find out for herself instead of assuming the worst, hence the test to see if her mother would be sober in the middle of the night. And that seemed to be the end of their relationship problems. We never hear of her mom again until Ellie's dad gets sick. It doesn't mean their home life is perfect thereafter, but at least her mom's actions aren't causing Ellie to self-harm. I think the shooting was also ultimately positive for Jay too, but in a less obvious way. I'll go into more detail in a future video, but this is part of what led Jay to stop being so terrible. He was still the worst even after getting kicked out of school, but he was forced to face consequences for his actions for once and to slowly grow from his mistakes. He lost Sean, Alex, school, Emma, even Spinner before deciding to try to be better, or at least consider someone other than himself. Through the rest of Season 4 and into Season 5, Jay spent his time running from accepting blame for what he had helped cause while also trying to avoid being alone. I think this is why he spent so much time pestering Alex. He couldn't handle losing a kindred spirit, especially because it meant facing what he did to drive her away. Jay eventually reconciled with Alex by recognizing her as a person and not as a mean to his end. He found himself a job to spend his time constructively, and eventually became friends with Spinner again to the point where he officiated his marriage to Emma. There was a character arc buried in the few times we saw Jay in the period before Season 7. Spinner's arc after the shooting was more upfront. As mentioned last time, Spinner was fraught with guilt. Just ignoring it seemed to work until Jimmy returned to school. Not being able to just not visit the hospital wouldn't help Spinner hide from his guilt. He tried to ease it by helping Jimmy at school and trying to, in a way, pay for the debt he owed his friend. But I really don't think it was for Jimmy's sake. Spinner wanted the guilt to go away. He wanted to make himself feel better about what happened, and hoped to do so by essentially spoiling Jimmy as best he could. Hell, it would seem Spinner confessing to Jimmy was a selfish act done to ease the burden of hiding such a burning secret. He didn't actually want to face the consequences for his crime. Spinner has been terrible in the past, but he never had to answer for his actions. Even Jimmy eventually forgave Spinner for stealing his MP3, even though Spinner didn't change in the end or make up for what he'd done. He still didn't really treat Jimmy like a friend, especially right before the shooting. But this was a start to Spinner's redemption and betterment. Like Jay, Spinner was also forced to not only recognize his wrongdoing, but also be better. It started with behaving so that he can finish high school. Goodbye, Spinner the bully. Then he had to realize that apologies and promising to be better were a start, but not enough, especially to quiet the guilt he felt. Becoming Christian really helped him in that. It didn't make him perfect, but it got him to move past how he felt about what he'd done and be mindful of trying to do the right thing for once. It helped him to understand that forgiveness can't be forced, and all you can do is hope to earn it by learning from your trespasses. Ultimately, it wasn't anything that Spinner did that made Jimmy and company forgive him. No amount of begging helped. Time did. His friends felt that he'd atoned enough, and Jimmy decided his anger was overstaying its welcome. It's actually a character flaw in Jimmy. Throughout the show, he's having to learn when it's okay to hold a grudge and blame others, and when it's time to move on. You can't really blame him for hating Spinner this time though. This wasn't just Spinner taking his MP3. This time it was his legs and months of his life that he will never get back, even if he does eventually walk. Not visiting was understandable. Jimmy thought it out while in the hospital and decided, of course Spinner might have found it awkward to visit, seeing as their last interaction ended in a fight. But causing Rick to target Jimmy was more severe and needed a lot more time to even possibly get over. Another part of this anger from Jimmy was the question of, did Spinner really need to tell him that his supposed friend got him shot? That's something harder to answer. I wish the show spent more time pondering this, but that doesn't mean what we got was subpar. The specter that haunted Jimmy for the rest of his life on the show was the question, who is Jimmy Brooks now? Before, he was the athlete, the basketball star. But that was before he lost his legs. Who was post-shooting Jimmy? For a while, he tried to slip into his old skin, coach basketball and attempt to play in the wheelchair league, but it never made him happy. It just reminded him of what he couldn't be and who he wasn't. It was especially hard when everyone around him seemed to expect the old Jimmy to roll out of the hospital. But old Jimmy never left Degrassi on the day of the shooting. Old Jimmy didn't take a bullet to his spine or get betrayed by his best friend. Not only did he need to prove this to himself, but his friends, his girlfriend, and especially his dad. Jimmy has always lived under the expectations of his parents, even though we didn't see it up until now. But the reason for that was his parents weren't around much to begin with. And after the shooting, Jimmy's problems with them, and especially his dad, came to a head. Now he couldn't and didn't want to be the basketball star his dad expected. He wanted to take risks on his new passions like open up a t-shirt shop or attempt stem cell treatment. But every step of the way, his dad would fight his son's wishes. And every time, Jimmy had to act out in some way just to get his dad to listen, like breaking out of the hospital while in a wheelchair. Sadly, even came down to blackmailing. His father kept repeating the quote, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take," while insisting Jimmy doesn't take the promising chance to walk again. He would also expect proper conduct from his son while he was having an affair with his secretary. In part because of the shooting, Jimmy learned not to base his life around someone else and to take those chances when he thinks the odds are in his favor. He still doesn't really know who he is now, but at least he's not trapped in the mold of his past self. Others recognize he's never going to be the old Jimmy, but he can still at least try to reach for the things that he wants out of his life. And of course, who could forget Emma and the events that led to the line,
"You gave me a social disease."
I see season 4 as a major turning point in her character. Before, her biggest problems came from her trying to hold to her morals and dealing with being hurt. But here, she was changing. Some people have said that the shooting sort of reset her, that she was straying from herself like when she was being petty over her breakup with Chris, and then the shooting set her straight because we don't see her do this again. But I don't think that part of her was actually resolved. Or maybe it was, and Emma learned the error of her ways through losing her friends. Hard to say. What is certain is the shooting played on a deep flaw in Emma. Even before this point, being basically perfect and strong was a point of pride for her. When she had a problem, she would handle it before getting someone else involved. But now she was faced with trauma that couldn't be resolved by herself. She was suffering inside, but chose to hide it rather than be honest. Sure, she broke down to Snake immediately after returning to school for the first time, but afterwards, she decided that old Emma would bounce back from this, that everyone expected her to. But really, that was just her perception. And a warped view of herself is something that we'll later see in season 5 with her anorexia. Hell, we see her refuse to eat while under distress as early as this period. While trying to act brave, Emma tried to resolve her pain by seeking happiness away from the things that she used to care about, like Manny. Even though Liberty still didn't like Emma, Manny tried to give her support, invite Emma to hang out, but she was withdrawn, even from school, as Mr. Perino points out. I think she sought comfort and company from Jay partially because he was a connection to Sean in happier times. But more for certain, she seemed to want to spend time with him because he didn't seem to want her to be the old Emma. He didn't want her to be strong or perfect, just for her to perform sexual favors. And she loved that being with Jay quieted those who taunted her for trying to be perfect. But then she got gonorrhea and had to at least partially admit to her shortcomings. Being in control and being able to at least appear perfect is something Emma values greatly, and blows to this ideal hit hard. It definitely is made explicit in season 5, and it's likely safe to assume that what she endured because of the shooting added to her later struggles. How much isn't made clear, but it's safe to say that she was still haunted by what happened. And that's really true for everyone who was affected by the shooting. Even if the initial trauma wears off, the painful memory survives. But what changes is how a person deals with it. You can seek help when the pain gets to be too much, you can seek to reaffirm hope, you can learn from what happened, or you can let it eat you up inside. Even though season 4 is filled with great episodes and memorable plots, the Time Stand Still two-parter will always define the season and the series for outsiders. But for fans, or me at least, I think Degrassi the show has done a good job of moving on. Things were off in the seasons immediately following, partially because the experiment of following the cast to college didn't work, but they again found their footing and gave us more defining stories. Adam, Cam, Holly J, the list goes on. Even if others think of Degrassi as the show where young Drake got shot, I take joy in being able to witness the show tell tales that last, even after this point. Thank you very much for consuming this video. If you'd like to talk to me about just about anything, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. You can find me at NotAVampyre. Thank you very much again, and until next time.